You've seen the AI headline so many times. The numbers stop meaning anything. Another 100 billion. Another mega campus. Another record. They're just something you scroll past on Instagram. Oh, wow. And 3 seconds later you're back to watching a guy make pasta. But here's the number that should stop your thumb. $1.65 trillion. That's what one study found 5 tech companies owe in obligations that never show up on their balance sheets. Not loans you can see. Not debt anyone's reporting. Money that's simply not there on paper. And the system that hides has a name Wall Street spent 20 years trying to forget. This year alone, big tech is on track to spend more than $700 billion building out AI. That's roughly 2.5 cents of every dollar the entire U.S. economy produces. NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang calls it the largest infrastructure build-out in human history. Nobody's asking the obvious question, how are we actually paying for this? The answer starts with that $1.65 trillion in hidden obligations, compared to about $1.35 trillion of debt these same 5 companies do report. The hidden pile isn't just bigger than the visible one, it dwarfs it. Take Meta. Their off-balance sheet debt is nearly triple what they report. Moving that much money out of sight isn't something you improvise. It takes a system. Summer of 2007, right before the financial crisis. An economist at PIMCO stands up at the Fed's Jackson Hole Symposium and warns everyone about a second banking system growing in the dark. Institutions that borrow like banks, lend like banks, but aren't banks. No deposit insurance. No Fed safety net. No regulation. He calls it the shadow banking system. Here's the plain English version of how it works. Say a company, call it Acme Corp., wants to borrow a mountain of money but doesn't want that debt on its own books. So Acme creates a second company, a special purpose vehicle, on paper, completely separate, its own name, its own bank account, its own debts. The SPV borrows the money, buys the asset Acme needs, leases it back to Acme. Acme gets to use the asset. The debt sits on the SPV's books, not Acme's. It's like opening a credit card in your cousin's name. You're the one swiping it. You're the one enjoying everything it buys. But when a bank asks about your debts, the answer is technically zero. In 2007, this machine ran on mortgages. Today, it runs on data centers. Sponsor break goes here. No single pool of money on earth is deep enough to fund the largest build-out in history alone. So big tech started with the most obvious source, their own cash. On paper, these are the safest borrowers alive. The top-rated names carry net debt of just 0.04 times earnings, the lowest of any U.S. sector. For most of the last decade, these companies spent 40 to 50 cents of every dollar of operating cash on capital expenditure. This year, PIMCO estimates that number hits 94 cents. The vault isn't funding the build-out anymore. The build-out is draining the vault, so they hit the bond markets hard. From 2020 to 2024, the average was $28 billion a year in bonds across the 5 biggest hyperscalers. In 2025, that jumped past $100 billion, 4 times the previous pace. And in just the first 5 months of 2026, they've already issued another $159 billion, more than the previous 5 years combined. Tech now makes up nearly 18% of all U.S. investment-grade debt outstanding. The IMF is flagging it. Tobias Adrian, a senior IMF official and former New York Fed vice president, put it bluntly, major tech firms are starting to leverage up themselves. When the U.S. market got saturated, they went global. In February, Alphabet raised $32 billion across 4 currencies in under 24 hours, including a 100-year bond, oversubscribed 10 times over. Companies with 0 bonds in a currency a year earlier became top issuers in it overnight. A bond manager summed it up. Even the largest credit market on earth, the U.S. dollar market, can't absorb what these companies need. That's the moment this stops being a normal financing story. You can only put so much debt on your own books. So it's back to the special purpose vehicle. Except now, it's hiding in plain sight, buried in the footnotes of public filings that only finance nerds actually read. Let's zoom into one deal. The biggest ever done, the blueprint every later deal copied, $27 billion. the largest project financing bond ever issued at investment grade, all resting on a special purpose vehicle named after New Orleans pastry, Beignet Investor. Its only purpose: own a data center campus called Hyperion, a multi-gigawatt site in rural Richland Parish, Louisiana. Meta announced it. Meta designed it. Meta builds it. Meta is the only tenant it will ever have. But the $27 billion that built it belongs to the pastry. Here's how. Blue Owl Capital, a private investment firm, creates Beignet Investor and puts up 80% of the equity. Meta takes the remaining 20% and signs on as the sole tenant. Beignet issues $27.3 billion in investment-grade bonds. Bondholders, BlackRock, PIMCO, some of the largest money managers on earth, wire in the cash. Beignet builds Hyperion. Meta moves in and pays rent. That rent pays the bondholders back year after year until 2049. Meta's machines, Meta's engineers, Meta's data center. But Meta legally owns just 20% of it. Why? Beneficiary. One phrase in accounting rules. Not the primary beneficiary. Meta is the primary. $27 billion in debt is not Meta's debt. It legally vanishes from the balance sheet. But flip to page 106 of Meta's own annual report, and one buried sentence says something different. Meta has guaranteed the building's residual value up to roughly $28 billion. If Meta ever walks away and Hyperion's worth less than that floor, Meta writes a check for the difference. So to Wall Street, we didn't borrow the $27 billion. This isn't our liability. To bondholders, don't worry. We've got you covered up to $28 billion. Same $27 billion. Two completely different stories, told to two different audiences. And the fine print gets stranger. Beignet's bonds run until 2049. Meta's lease doesn't even start until 2029 and renews in 4-year chunks. A 24-year loan resting on a 4-year lease for a hyper-customized supercomputing facility built around Meta's own hardware in rural Louisiana. If Meta ever walks, bondholders are left holding an extremely specific building for the next 2 decades. Beignet wasn't a one-off. It became a template. Last week, BlackRock started marketing the sequel, Project Zoapia, over $12 billion in bonds for Meta's newest 1-gigawatt AI data center in El Paso, Texas. Same 80-20 structure, different pastry. 2 deals alone don't prove much. The 9-month trend does. Off-book debt across 5 major tech companies has grown roughly 8 times since 2022. Quinn Emanuel, a law firm, counted $120 billion plus moved off balance sheets in under 2 years. Moody's found nearly $1 trillion in signed future AI data center lease obligations, of which $660 billion plus is completely invisible on the company's main balance sheets. Morgan Stanley puts total industry-wide off-balance sheet exposure at roughly $1.8 trillion. This isn't just Meta, it's the whole sector. And here's the part that makes it systemic. It's the same small club of lenders on nearly every deal. 5 borrowers, 1 structure, 1 handful of lenders. The risk stops being diversifiable. It's the same bet written 5 times. The last 2 times a financing structure standardizes fast across a whole industry. Telecom vendor financing between 1998 and 2000, and mortgage securitization between 2004 and 2007. A Quinn Emanuel lawyer, who spent years litigating the fallout from 2008, described watching this unfold in 2 words: deja vu. So, how is the largest infrastructure build-out in human history actually being paid for? First cash, until machines started eating 94 cents of every dollar. Then bonds, until the deepest credit market on earth couldn't absorb them. Now the footnotes, where the hidden debt pile has quietly grown past the public balance sheets. I've spent weeks inside these filings. I don't know how this ends. But I know what has to go right, because this isn't really an investment anymore. It's the largest bet in history, and the bet has 4 legs. First, revenue has to multiply, not grow. AI revenue sits around $110 billion a year, against $700 billion plus in spending. Second, returns have to stop shrinking. Return on every new dollar cloud giant invests has already slid from around 40% toward 20%, with projections pointing toward 10% if spending keeps up. Third, The borrowing window has to stay open. Morgan Stanley pegs a buildout at $2.9 trillion through 2028. Companies' own cash flows cover about $1.4 trillion of that, leaving a $1.5 trillion hole. Fourth, the grid has to absorb it. America's largest power market is already pinned at its price cap. None of this is secret. It's sitting in public filings, auction records, and analyst reports. The stuff nobody reads except finance nerds and Patagonia vests. That's what this channel does. I read it, you get what matters. Because when you line up everything that has to go right, this stops looking like an investment into an emerging technology. It starts looking like a parlay. 4 legs, stacked on top of each other. Every single one has to hit.